with, I think a lot of people is it's almost construed as background.
22 Grammys, the golden voice of country music. But in 2000, he did something that turned half his fans against him. He married Amy Grant. Both had just divorced their spouses. The Christian community called it adultery. Radio stations banned their music. Protesters showed up at his concerts with hate signs. 25 years later, the health problems keep coming. At 67, the man who had everything is watching it slip away. Vince Gill was born on April 12, 1957 in Norman, Oklahoma, into a home where law and music collided in the strangest way. His father, a federal judge, could also play the banjo, guitar, and harmonica like a seasoned bluegrass veteran. Sometimes, after courtroom sessions, Judge Gill would come home and jump into late-night jam sessions with his wife, Jiren, who played harmonica too. Vince used to lie in bed, listening to their music drift down the hallway. Neighbors still talk about those summer nights when the sound of guitars and harmonicas spilled out onto the streets. This odd mix of courtroom seriousness and porch-picking joy left a deep mark on Vince's soul. But growing up wasn't easy. Vince was born with crossed eyes. It wasn't just a minor issue. It required 2 painful surgeries. Even after that, his left eye still wandered when he was tired or upset. He later admitted that he started wearing glasses not just to see better, but to hide the eye that made him feel broken. As a kid, classmates teased him so much that he started avoiding people altogether. Instead, he stayed home, locked in with his guitar. He wasn't running from the world. He was building a new one. When Vince was 10, tragedy hit hard. His half-brother Bob got into a terrible car crash on a rainy highway outside Oklahoma City. Bob, once a bright student and a promising athlete, was left with brain damage so severe that he couldn't even remember people's names. For over 25 years, Bob needed full-time care. Judge Gill had to take on extra legal work to pay for it all. Vince watched his parents' marriage crack under the pressure. Bob finally died in 1993 from a heart attack caused by his injuries. That pain never left Vince. Years later, he said those moments taught him what it meant to really lose something. That pain poured into his songs, the kind that make people cry quietly in their cars. At age 5, during a visit to his grandmother's house, Vince picked up her old acoustic guitar and started trying to play Old Shep. In 30 minutes, without a single lesson, he figured out the chords and began to sing. His grandma was stunned and called Vince's parents, telling them she'd just seen something rare. By the time Vince turned 10, his family had scraped together enough to buy him a Gibson ES3 35 electric guitar. That guitar cost nearly $800 in 1967, equal to about $6,500 today. And it wasn't just a gift, it was a declaration. Vince wasn't just a kid with a hobby. He was a musician. Music became his escape. When things got rough at home, Vince didn't lash out. He disappeared into his guitar. He spent 6 to 8 hours a day playing, mostly alone in the basement. Friends and family recall hearing sad, emotional tunes echoing through the walls. His music teacher later wrote that Vince had a deep, aching sound in his playing, something far beyond his age. He didn't talk about pain. He turned it into melody. By high school, Vince had started a bluegrass band called Mountain Smoke. On March 4th, 1976, something surreal happened. They opened for Kiss. Yes, Kiss, the makeup-wearing rock monsters. The show took place at the Oklahoma City Fairgrounds, and the crowd didn't know what to make of a bunch of kids playing bluegrass. They wanted fire and leather. Instead, they got fiddles and banjos. The crowd booed. They threw cups. Someone even threw shoes. Vince snapped. He flipped the crowd off, mooned them, and stormed off stage. It was raw, embarrassing, and unforgettable. After that chaos, the band fell apart. But Vince didn't give up. He moved to Kentucky and joined Bluegrass Alliance. By 1977, he was in a band called Boom Creek, playing with a young Ricky Skaggs. The two of them lit up the bluegrass scene. Even though the group didn't last long, their style helped create a new sound, mixing old-school bluegrass with modern edge. That band's one album, recorded in 1977, is now a cult favorite. People still talk about it like they discovered buried treasure. Later that same year, Vince packed up again, this time heading west. He landed in Los Angeles and joined Sundance, a band led by fiddle legend Byron Berlin. Berlin was no joke. He'd played with Bill Monroe and the Flying Burrito Brothers. He expected perfection. Vince learned fast. They played the Palomino Club, one of LA's iconic venues, and rubbed shoulders with legends like Emmylou Harris and Linda Ronstadt. Less than a year after being booed off stage, Vince was now performing with Grammy-winning musicians. That kind of bounce back takes serious guts. In September 1978, Pure Prairie League was falling apart. Their lead singer, Larry Goshorn, had just left along with his brother to start a new band. The group, now made up of no original members, was desperate to survive. They began holding auditions, hoping to find someone who could keep the music alive. That's when a young bluegrass musician named Vince Gill re-entered their lives. 2 years earlier, in 1976, Gill had opened for Pure Prairie League with his band Mountain Smoke in Oklahoma City. They noticed him immediately. He was only 19, but his talent stood out. They offered him a spot back then, but he said no. Bluegrass was still his passion. Now, in 1978, he was in Los Angeles playing with Byron Berlin and Sundance. One night, he jammed again with Pure Prairie League. Within hours, they offered him the job. This time, he said yes. Jeff Reeder, the band's sound man, remembered it clearly. We'd seen him play in 1976, but he was committed to bluegrass. When he came back in 1978, we knew he was the one. Vince Gill became the new frontman. He wasn't just singing. He was playing guitar, mandolin, and fiddle, anything with strings. At 21, he was stepping into a bigger spotlight than ever before. By 1979, the band was recording their next album, Can't Hold Back, in Miami at Criteria Studios. It would be their 7th studio album, but the first with Gill as a full-time member. His presence changed everything. His voice added something smooth and emotional. He also started writing songs, blending country warmth with pop melodies. The band's longtime member Michael Riley said it best. He was a breath of fresh air. The album didn't become a huge hit, but it gave the band new life. And for Vince, it was the beginning of something much bigger. Then came 1980. That's when things exploded. The band released Firin' Up, and it included their biggest hit ever, Let Me Love You Tonight. The song shot up to number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. Gill sang lead, and his voice carried the entire track. They even brought in jazz legend David Sanborn to play saxophone. It was smooth, catchy, and fresh. Vince didn't stop there. He wrote I'm Almost Ready and 5 more songs on that same album. She's All Mine, You're My True Love, Lifetime of Nighttime, I'll Be Damned, and Jam Lou. The sound had shifted. It was now softer, more polished, and leaning into country pop, and Vince Gill was leading that change. But good runs don't always last. In 1981, they released Something in the Night. It had a minor hit, Still Right Here in My Heart, but the album didn't connect like the last one. Then disaster hit behind the scenes. Casablanca Records, their label, went bankrupt and was sold to Polygram. The new owners dropped most of the roster, including Pure Prairie League. Without a label and with disappointing sales, the band was stuck. Vince Gill and guitarist Jeff Wilson left in early 1982. Gill had already caught attention as a solo artist, and soon after, he signed with RCA Records. Pure Prairie League brought in Gary Burr to replace him, but the magic was gone. The momentum was lost. Vince's time with the band was over, but his solo journey was just beginning. During this same period, something else happened that would shape his life forever. In California, while building his music career, Vince met Janice Oliver. She was part of the country duo Sweethearts of the Rodeo. They started out as friends in the music scene, but things quickly grew serious. In 1980, they got married. 2 years later, on May 5, 1982, their daughter Jennifer Jean Gill was born. In 1982, Vince Gill thought he was on the verge of something big. His song Let Me Love You Tonight had gotten attention, and he felt sure his solo career was about to take off. So when Rodney Crowell invited him to join his band, the Cherry Bombs, Gill said no. He wanted to make it on his own, but the music world can be cruel. As the year went on, his momentum faded. His songs didn't chart. Gigs dried up. confidence turned to doubt. By the end of the year, Gill was struggling. So early in 1983, he called Crowell back and accepted the offer. Joining the Cherry Bombs turned out to be the smartest move he could have made. This wasn't just any backup band. It was a powerhouse group of musicians, including Tony Brown and Emery Gordy Jr., names that would later shape the sound of country music. The band was on the road constantly, playing close to 200 shows a year. It was exhausting but educational. Gill sharpened his guitar skills, improved his stage presence, and made connections that would pay off for the rest of his life. He learned how to survive in the industry not by chasing fame, but by playing the long game. That same year, Vince made a bold move. He packed up his life in Los Angeles and moved to Nashville with his wife Janice and their young daughter Jennifer. It wasn't glamorous. Money was tight. They lived in a small rental house, and Vince took any job he could get. One of those jobs was playing guitar for Roseanne Cash, who was married to Crowell at the time. That tour in 1983 became his classroom. Cash's band was tight, polished, and demanding. Vince had to grow up fast, on stage and at home. Balancing fatherhood with late-night rehearsals and uncertain paychecks wasn't easy. But those months in Nashville made him tougher, sharper, and more focused. Meanwhile, Tony Brown, his old bandmate from the Cherry Bombs, was climbing the ranks in Nashville. By 1984, Brown had become head of A&R at RCA Records. He hadn't forgotten about Vince. He believed Gill had something special, and he started pushing hard behind the scenes. Brown pitched Vince's demos to RCA's Joe Galante, calling in every favor he had. His efforts worked. In early 1984, Gill landed a solo deal with RCA. It wasn't just about talent. It was about trust. Brown knew Gill could deliver, and he stuck his neck out to prove it. Vince didn't waste a chance. His first solo release, a 6-song EP called Turn Me Loose, came out in February 1984. 3 of the songs made it into the top 40. Victim of Life Circumstances reached number 34. It wasn't a smash hit, but it was enough to get people's attention. Gill spent long hours in Nashville's Woodland Studios, recording with top session players. He didn't want filler tracks. He wanted every second to count. That dedication showed. The EP signaled that Gill wasn't just another hopeful voice in country music. He was a serious artist ready for bigger stages. That same year, things got even better. On April 10, 1984, Gill was named the Academy of Country Music's top new male vocalist. It was his first major award, and for a moment, it seemed like everything was finally falling into place. But fame didn't come overnight. His next album, The Things That Matter, dropped in 1985. It was good, but it didn't break through. Between 1984 and 1988, none of his singles cracked the top 10. Gill kept working, kept improving, but the spotlight stayed just out of reach. Still, that ACM award was a reminder he had the voice, the talent, and the industry watching. By 1989, Vince Gill was 32 years old and dangerously close to being forgotten. His records hadn't taken off, and RCA didn't know what to do with him. But Tony Brown wasn't done yet. Now working at MCA Records, Brown made another bold pitch. He convinced the label to sign Gill. It was a gamble. Most labels focus on younger acts, but Brown believed Gill's best work was still ahead. He gave him a fresh sound, stronger songs, and a team that understood him. Signing with MCA wasn't just a new contract. It was a second chance. That chance paid off fast. In October 1989, Gill released When I Call Your Name. It was unlike anything else on the radio. The album mixed country, pop, rock, and even bluegrass. It didn't follow trends. It made its own. Songs like Oklahoma Swing with Reba. McIntyre added a traditional feel. Others like Never Knew Lonely leaned into a softer, emotional sound. The title track, though, was the real standout. Gill's voice cut through like glass. Pure, aching, unforgettable. Critics loved the mix of styles. Fans couldn't stop playing it. And Nashville started paying attention again. When I Call Your Name didn't just earn airplay, it made history. The single climbed to number 2 on the Billboard country chart. Suddenly, Vince Gill wasn't just a respected musician. He was a hit maker. At the 1990 CMA Awards, the song won Single of the Year. 1 year later, It won Gill his first Grammy, Best Male Country Vocal Performance. The same song that almost didn't get released ended up changing his life. The emotion, the vocals, the production, it all came together at just the right time. Gill had arrived. In 1992, the album went platinum, over 1 million copies sold. That kind of success was rare, especially for an artist over 30 who hadn't yet had a major hit. The platinum certification wasn't just a number, it was validation. Radio couldn't get enough of his music. Concert promoters lined up to book him. Suddenly, the guy who once couldn't get a gig had become one of the hottest acts in country music. That record didn't just save his career, it rewrote it. And even with all that fame, Gill didn't pull away from others. He became one of Nashville's top session players. Big stars wanted him in the studio, not just for his guitar, but for his harmonies and feel. He worked with Reba again, adding vocals and guitar on her Sweet 16 album. He sang on Emmylou Harris's Bluebird. He helped shape Rosanne Cash's 1990 album Interiors. And in a surprising twist, Bonnie Raitt brought him in for her 1991 album Luck of the Draw. Gill could shift from country to rock to blues without missing a beat. Between 1992 and 1994, Vince Gill was everywhere. Country radio, award shows, sold-out arenas. His voice was the soundtrack of the time. In just those 2 years, he delivered 4 straight #1 hits. First came I Still Believe in You in 1992, then Don't Let Our Love Start Slipping Away, and One More Last Chance in 1993, and finally Trying to Get Over You in 1994. Each song hit the top of the Billboard Hot Country charts, not by luck, but because Gill had found the perfect blend of old-school country heart and new-school polish. I Still Believe in You didn't just top the charts. It lived there, spending 20 weeks in the top 10. For country music, that was a power move. For Gill, it was the moment he went from respected artist to unstoppable star. By the end of the decade, things started to shift. In 1998, he released The Key, an album that sounded different because it was different. It was about the end of his 17-year marriage to Janice Oliver, and every track was laced with raw honesty. Songs like The Key to Life and Kindly Keep It Country stripped away the polish and showed a man dealing with heartbreak and change. The album pulled in universal praise. Critics called it his boldest work yet. It didn't match the sales of his earlier records, but it didn't need to. The Key wasn't just another hit. It was a turning point, the close of his biggest chapter, and the start of something more personal. But Gill's private life wasn't just influencing his music. It was making headlines. In 2000, he married Amy Grant, the queen of Christian pop. She had sold over 30 million albums and won 6 Grammys by that point. Fans of both stars were stunned. Gill had just finalized his divorce in 1998. Grant had divorced her husband, Gary Chapman, in 1999. The timeline raised eyebrows. The two had met back in 1993, while still married to other people, and rumors of chemistry had followed them ever since. When they finally went public as a couple, it sent shockwaves through both the country and Christian music scenes. For some fans, it wasn't just gossip, it was betrayal. Grant's fan base in particular took it hard. She had been a symbol of wholesome, faith-based music for decades. Her songs were played in churches and youth groups. She wasn't just a singer, she was a spiritual icon. So when news of her divorce and remarriage hit, many of her Christian fans turned on her. Some radio stations even stopped playing her music. Others said they felt like they were mourning for her very soul. The backlash exposed something deeper, how fragile the pedestal can be when a religious figure dares to be human. Then in 2013, the past came roaring back. Vince Gill was scheduled to perform at the Kaufman Center in Kansas City. Outside the venue stood a group of protesters from the Westboro Baptist Church. Their signs were blunt. God hates adultery, and Vince Gill took another man's wife. They weren't just picketing. They were attacking his marriage to Grant years after fact. Most celebrities would have ignored them. Gill didn't. Instead, he walked right up to them, calm but direct. He confronted the protesters face to face. One of them shouted, "What are you doing with another man's wife? Don't you know divorce plus remarriage equals adultery?" Gill didn't flinch. Jesus also said a lot about forgiveness, about grace, He shot back, "You guys don't have any of that." The moment was caught on video and went viral almost immediately. Fans praised his courage. Others applauded the way he handled hate with truth and dignity. In 2020, Vince Gill went to a cardiologist appointment with his wife, Amy Grant. It was meant to be a routine visit for her, but strangely, both of them were flagged for further testing. That's when Gill found out he had a rare heart condition called PAPVR, partial anomalous pulmonary venous return. Less than 1% of people have it, and many never know. In his case, some of the veins in his lungs were sending oxygen-rich blood to the wrong side of the heart, forcing it to work harder for decades without him knowing. It could have led to sudden heart failure, but somehow he'd survived with all this. Time. Just weeks later, life threw another punch. Both Gill and Amy needed open-heart surgeries, back to back. Amy went in first, and Gill followed shortly after. This happened in the middle of the pandemic, when hospitals weren't allowing visitors. So instead of being there for each other, they were recovering alone. Gill later said those days were some of the loneliest of his life. But that brief moment when he was allowed to see Amy, he said it felt like a weight had been lifted. Together, they pushed through a year filled with pain, surgeries, and silence. Then came 2022, and tragedy struck again. Amy was riding her bicycle near a golf course in Nashville when she lost control and crashed. She was knocked unconscious for 10 minutes. When help arrived, she had suffered a traumatic brain injury. Memory loss hit her hard, and soon doctors found a growing cyst in her throat. It was so serious, she needed 5 hours of surgery to remove it. Afterward, she couldn't sing the way she used to. She had trouble walking straight, and joked that she felt drunk even when she wasn't. But Amy, always resilient, kept moving forward, calling herself an old car that had been dented and repainted. And Vince, he never left her side. In early 2023, Gill stepped back from 3 big concerts. Not because he wanted rest, but because Amy needed him. Her recovery from a bike crash and the throat surgery wasn't easy. Vince said it felt like they just couldn't catch a break, one disaster after another. Still, he stayed by her, helped her walk through the toughest days, and put her healing first. Fans praised him, calling it true love in action. But even outside of all this, Gill had his own health battles. His vocal cords developed polyps that made singing painful. He underwent therapy and surgeries just to keep doing what he loved. Then came the chronic back pain, forcing him into physical therapy and diet changes just to get through a day. Arthritis made things worse, and eventually he had to cut back on touring. But he didn't stop. He adjusted, worked around it, and found ways to keep going. And then came something no one expected. In late 2022, a 75-year-old woman named Joyce posted a harmless comment on Vince Gill's Instagram. Just a fan hoping he'd come to Boston. What followed was a nightmare. Scammers pretending to be Gill reached out to her privately. They moved the chat to Telegram and convinced her they were in love. Over nearly a year, Joyce sent them her life savings, almost $450,000. They told her Gill was going through a divorce, that Amy had frozen his assets, and that he needed money to pay off an assault accusation. Every time she hesitated, they pushed harder. She even believed they were married and planned to move to be with him. Joyce's daughter tried to stop it. So did social workers. But the scammers had tricked her completely. Her mind, already struggling with age and memory issues, couldn't see the truth. By the time the truth came out, the money was gone, and Joyce was left broken, financially and emotionally. Vince Gill's team finally stepped in. They released a public warning saying that if anyone claimed to be Vince Gill online, they absolutely weren't. His accounts were run by professionals. He would never message fans privately. But by then the damage was already done. Joyce's case wasn't the only one. It was just one of the most heartbreaking. In May 2025, Vince had another health scare. This time it was kidney stones. Painful enough to send him to the hospital. He had to cancel shows in Birmingham and St. Louis. His daughter Jenny told fans he was recovering, but it had been scary. Gill, known for always showing up, had to step back again, and fans understood. They flooded social media with prayers and messages, reminding everyone that behind the fame was a man who had been through more than most. Still, even with all these setbacks, Vince wasn't slowing down. In May 2025, he kicked off a massive summer tour, his biggest in years. It wasn't just any tour. It marked 50 years since he left Oklahoma in 1975 to chase his dreams. The tour would hit over 30 cities, ending with 4 emotional nights at the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, a place Gill considers sacred. He's performed there over 100 times, but this solo residency meant something different. It was a victory lap. By 2025, Vince Gill had become more than just a country music star. He had outlasted fads, survived serious illness, supported his wife through the worst moments of her life, and still returned to the stage with his heart wide open. His shows were packed, and his voice, repaired and preserved, was still as soulful as ever. And he didn't come alone. For this tour, Gill assembled an 8-piece band filled with Nashville's best. Jim Moose Brown on keys, Wendy Moten with vocals that could shake the walls, Tom Bukovac on guitar, and a full lineup of legends who had played with the biggest names in the business. These weren't just background players. They were family. The chemistry on stage was real. They joked, traded solos, and lifted each other up, just like Gill had lifted everyone around him over the past few years.